What's up, y'all? This week, our spotlight comes in two parts and features Clint Deloatch, a veteran journalist who's heading home after working as a news anchor for 3 years at CCTV News. In part one, Clint talks about working in the media industry and the power it holds to shape our worldview. It starts now. Hello, Mr. Deloatch.
Hello, Mr. Bizu. Thank you for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Thank you for taking the time out to speak with us. How are you doing in Beijing? You're in Beijing right now, right?
I am in Beijing, preparing to go back to the U.S. Though I've been here like 3.5 years, and at this point, it's about time for me to go home for some personal reasons. But yeah, I'm in Beijing, and I've liked it here, really.
Oh, wow. Okay, 3.5 years. That's a pretty good stint. You know, that's a pretty good tour of China. Okay, well, if you don't mind, let's get right into it. Where are you from, and what brought you to China?
I'm from the state of North Carolina in the U.S. My hometown is a little small town. In fact, I tell people here it's a village. The name of it is Margarettsville, North Carolina. And most of the times when you hear a city in the States that has a name with "ville" on the end, it usually means it's pretty small, unless it's Jacksonville in Florida. How I ended up in China, I've been a journalist on my entire career, and I'd worked in television for CNN for a number of years, and I'd done local news in North Carolina, my home state, and in Virginia, the neighboring state. And strangely enough, one day I was home. I guess this would have been in 2012, and I was on the internet perusing the journalism jobs website, and CCTV had an ad for a job, and I just kind of filled their ad out on a whim, sent them my resume, and just kind of, quite honestly, I forgot about it for a while. And about 3 months later, I got an email from somebody in Beijing who said they wanted to do a Skype interview with me. And I said, okay, why not? And I did the Skype interview with them. And they offered me a job and told me they wanted me to come to Beijing. Now, that was a bit odd because at first I thought, well, I know they have an office in Washington. Maybe they want to interview me for their Washington job. But I talked to a fellow named Mr. Jew, it was. I don't think he's with CCTV now, but he said, no, we want you to come to Beijing. I got to tell you, I was a bit surprised by that because I'd never even been to China. But I said, okay, why not? And a few months later, I was on a plane coming to Beijing.
And that's how you started your 3.5 year tour of China. All right. Pretty interesting.
That's how I ended up in China for 3.5 years. Now, I got to tell you, when I first accepted the job, I thought, well, I'll go to China for a year. Well, why not? You know, at the time, this was 2012 when I started the process, and the U.S. economy was still pretty bad. And quite honestly, I was working part-time anyway, you know, doing what they call contract work there in Atlanta. Okay. And these guys were talking about a full-time job, and I was working at the CBS station or working wherever somebody would hire me for a day. The economy was kind of bad, and I said, well, I actually do need a full-time job. So I came. I planned to stay 1 year. That was 3.5 years ago.
Yeah, that's usually how China works. Yeah, you always plan to stay one, and then next thing you know, you're showing photos of your kids and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
You say you've been in journalism for about 20 years. 20 years now? Going on?
More than 20 years.
More than 20 years.
Wow. That's my secret, you see. That's my secret, you see, though. I never tell people exactly how long. When I say more than 20 years. Okay. I was 5 years old. I was 5 years old when I first started doing television.
Oh, wow. How did that work? I feel like there's labor laws or something involved with that. 5 years old?
Well, see, yeah, I told them I was 5 years old. That way they don't know how old I am.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, well, was CCTV, was that your first job in news outside of the U.S.?
No, I had worked previously in Istanbul in Turkey. This
Oh,
was in 2010, 11, and parts of again starting in 2009 actually.
uh-huh.
2009, 10. It starts to run together. Never get over 35. You start to forget. Oh, I just told you I'm over 35, but never get over 35. You start forgetting stuff. Um, I worked in Istanbul, Turkey first. I was there for almost 3 years. I worked for a private television station, and Turkey being a smaller country compared to China, our signal was countrywide, quite honestly, but because we were on cable and everything else. But I worked
Uh-huh.
at a private television operation in Istanbul. The name of it was Six News, and that was quite an experience as well, being able to work in Turkey and being able to work in a big, beautiful, historic city like Istanbul. It makes me think a lot, quite honestly, of Beijing, in that it was such an old city with so much history, like China has so much history.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like you've been doing news, in different parts of the world. But you also said you've worked at CNN. So
I did.
in your opinion, how is media and journalism, how is that different abroad than it is from the States? Because I know that a lot of people around the world seem to get they seem to use Western journalism as an example. You have CNN, BBC, things like that. So, how is it working for non-Western media sources or media
Working
platforms, I
for
should say?
working for non-media non-Western media platforms, I think gives a journalist a broader perspective on the world. What we get in the U.S. and from the West is a Western perspective on everything,
Hmm.
and many times the media outside of the U.S. and outside of the West is criticized. Much of it is, in fact, state-owned, but it is often the states like Turkey has a state-owned media, Russia has state-owned media, China, of course, has CCTV, state-owned media. But it gives you a different perspective from what I'll call, see, because in the West we'll criticize these countries for having government media. Well, we have corporate media,
Hmm.
and our corporate media has its own biases that they like to pretend don't exist, but they do. And almost everything is reported from a Western perspective. That's probably fine if you're a Westerner, but the reality is, the majority of the population of the world is not from the West. Countries like India, China, Indonesia, and what you have is the Western media has its own biases, often a bias against countries like China, biases certainly against countries like Russia, biases against countries like Iran. So they will often come with a Western perspective that totally ignores and negates anything that comes from a Moscow or a Beijing or a Tehran. And quite often it is downplayed as propaganda. Well, if you're a Russian and you look at the Western coverage of what's going on in Ukraine, or for an example, for them, what the West is reporting is propaganda, because they don't see it as what's going on in their particular parts of the world at all.
Hmm.
And quite often, like say for example here in China, the Chinese have, of course, their own view of the world, which doesn't always line up with the views of Washington D.C. The U.S. Or Western media often will take the perspective of Washington, almost quoting directly our White House on everything, but then negating and totally ignoring what actually comes out of Beijing, or what actually might come out of certainly out of any other country that doesn't have a Western perspective. So it kind of gives you a balance. You do start to see both sides in issues, and you will also develop the perspective that, quite honestly, Washington isn't always right. They just aren't. And I think it gives you a broader view of the world.
What's going on, y'all?
Hey everybody,
I'm Mr. Bizu,
I'm Lady Sasha.
and we're the hosts of the No Name Podcast, and we're looking for business owners to be a part of the Sahelian Outpost Black Business Directory in Asia.
If you or someone you know has started a business here and wants to connect with others and expand, let us know and we will put them on a list with other entrepreneurs making big moves in Asia.
Just send us your name, nationality, location, company name, a 3-sentence description, and contact information to bizunsasha on Wechat, NNP Nation on Twitter, or No Name Podcast 123@gmail.com to get started.
And it can be in English ou en français.
That's right, or Portuguese, Espanol, Lingala, Swahili, anyone is good. Just let us know what your business is and be a part of the move to strengthen the Black business community in Asia.
And tune into the No Name Podcast for a look at Black life in China and news from around the Black diaspora,
which can now be found on the Sahelian Outpost at sahelianoutpost.com. Peace.
Bye.
With your, vast experience in the media industry and in journalism, do you think that the West's influence when it comes to media, do you think that's starting to weaken now that you have other countries like CCTV, RT, Al Jazeera, you have these other non-Western news sources growing in influence around the world?
I do believe that the Western influence is starting to weaken, and quite honestly, I think it's a good thing. As I've kind of alluded to in my previous statement, and that is that there is a gatekeeping role that the media has traditionally played. And if you don't get all of the perspectives, and I'm not saying what the West media reports is not true, it's just that they don't tell you all of the truth. And if you only get part of the facts, then you make your opinions and your judgments based on part of the facts rather than all of the facts. A classic example may be what's going on right now in Brazil. The Brazilian media and supporters of the president who was just ousted sees the ousting of their new president, of their duly elected, legally elected president, put out of office, not through an election, Dilma Rousseff. Many people in Brazil see that as a legislative coup. They don't see it as the legislature in Brazil working on behalf of the people. They see it working on behalf of just only part of the people, like the right wing political side of their government down there. And the unfortunately, sometimes the Western media will take the view of the corporates and we'll take the view of what we'll call the Western view of things and just totally discount what the other side of the issue, the other side of the story. In the case of clearly in the case of Dilma Rousseff, or in the case if you look at the what went on in Ukraine a couple of years ago. A lot of the Western media has taken purely a Western point of view, where there is a huge part of the Russian population, as well as the people in Ukraine themselves, who don't see what happened in Ukraine, that is the overthrow again of a democratically elected president who was not voted out of office, simply chased out of office, as something that was right. They take a totally opposite view. And unfortunately, sometimes the Western media doesn't balance those concerns out at all. They'll take the Western point of view and go with it as if that were all of the facts involved in what happened in these. Those just two countries in particular. And so you will end up with a different point of view from the people who are actually in that location. And it's always better, I think, for people to get all of the facts from both sides in a balanced way, And then that way they get the opportunity, the people outside of those countries get the opportunity to make their decisions based on all of the facts, not just what some people want them to hear, you know?
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Well, I wanted to ask you, in your experience, now that you've worked in media in Turkey, you worked in media in China, and you've worked in media in the US, in your opinion, what do you think people's relationships are with the media, in places like Turkey and China as opposed to places like in the US?
Well, you'll find there's an interesting two sets of groups, I think. We have now so many other distractions in our lives. See, I can recall a time when the news, just the news in general, was mainly brought to people through newspapers and television, as opposed to the kinds of media like you have now, new media, the internet. So that the network television and the major newspapers had an even greater influence because people didn't have all these other alternative ways of finding out more information than what was simply presented to them. So what you've got a case now where people have other sources, so it makes them a bit more broadly informed, but you also have so many things going on that there's a segment of our population, both in the U.S. and abroad, who simply tune out. To them, there's just too much going on, so they pay no attention to anything.
Mm.
Then you've got another group that is acutely attuned to what's going on, and you can be surprised at how much one person might know about specific subjects because they found something that they were interested in. For example, I have friends who are from Ukraine, so just to kind of mention that again, they're from Ukraine, so they follow everything that's involved in the Ukraine-Russia conflict or the Ukraine-Russia tensions. Or you find somebody who's acutely attuned to what's going on with China and the Philippines or China and its neighbors because they're Chinese and they really want to know. But so you've got this interesting going on. The people who really want it, the people who have an interest in something, will have a lot of knowledge about it. But then you'll find there's a big group who simply thinks there's too much going on. I don't want to know about any of it because for some reason it's too confusing or it's just above me. So then you get this other group that simply pays no attention to any of it at all. I guess we've always had that, I've just kind of noticed a very distinct development there where there's just two different groups, you know.
Okay. All right. Do you think that in places where media is more overtly controlled, like for instance, like China, for instance, where you have
Yeah,
like
China,
big,
Turkey, there are lots of countries, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Do you think that people from these places now are hungrier for more platforms to get information from?
I believe so. Yes. Again, you've got these two distinct groups. You've got a
Mm.
group that's just totally happy not to know what's going on in the world. They're kind of oblivious to everything. But then you've got this other group, which is unfortunately, I think, smaller than the group that just, more concerned about their own personal lives. But you've got this group that knows now that they have access to things via the internet, even in countries that attempt to control the media.
Hmm.
There are ways around it, and the people who have an interest will find ways to get more information than they had before. And with the development of the internet and mobile applications for almost everything, it's pretty difficult for any government, be it China or Turkey or others, to control what the people who are interested want to know. It's pretty easy for them to control the people who, again, who think their lives are just too busy to care. So you've got this distinct group, and then I think you'll see that, say, for example, here in China, classically, just about a year or so ago, there were tensions with Hong Kong, and there were protests in Hong Kong and about the Chinese central government's role in Hong Kong. And there were some people who knew very much about what was going on in Hong Kong, despite the Chinese government's actions to try to control or at least limit the reporting of what was happening in Hong Kong. And then again, you had this group who apparently didn't know what was going on in Hong Kong because they didn't seem to care enough to try to find out,
Thanks for tuning in, y'all, and be sure to come back to check out part 2 of our Spotlight with Clint Deloatch. Until then, you can follow us on Twitter at NNP Nation and Facebook at No Name Podcast. You can also check out our older shows on SoundCloud and YouTube under No Name Podcast. And if you want to reach out to us, you can hit us up on Wechat at bizunsasha. BIZUNSASHA. This is Mr. Bizu. We'll see you guys later. Peace.